Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing?
Pretty good, all things considered.
Good stuff. Big day, free agency day. And Bruce, the coming edition of the Edmonton Oilers are going to look significantly like the previous edition of the Edmonton Oilers, except with Jack Campbell in net and maybe a few other changes that have yet to come. But what I'm seeing from Oilers fans and what I'm seeing feeling myself is there's a sense that Ken Holland did a pretty darn good job today, and there was and in retaining the team that he had, which was some amount of challenge in the end, he has succeeded because he's done so, I think, for what people see as reasonable cap hits on at least two of the three big signings today. Maybe two of the best cap hits. There's different for like on Evander Kane. There's one group of people who say that was the best deal of the day, and I might be in that group. And then people who like on ice stats like Corsi and Fenwick and expected goals for might point to the Kulak signing as the best signing of the day. I saw Evolving Wild say that.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of into
great.
that kind of evaluation. Yeah. Or one of the best signings of the day. I don't know what the best signing of the day is, but no, that's what they. I think that's what they said.
I value their evaluation. It's not going to be 100% right all the time, but they told us Val Nichushkin was a pretty good player, and you know what? They were right.
Well, they actually said he was a better player than Leon Draisaitl in 2019.
Well, by their metrics said he was
2019-20 is what they actually said.
Yeah, they were doing the whole shebang. Anyway, they did say he was a pretty good player, and I kind of started watching the guy at that point and going, yeah, not bad. Anyway.
And he's certainly gotten paid. Has he ever? Okay, so we're going to talk about Kane. We're going to talk about Campbell. We're going to talk about Kulak. And we'll talk about Connor Brown, the possibility the Oilers will trade for Connor Brown. And so let's start with you, Bruce. What did you think of the Kane signing?
Well, in for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. I mean, I stated my opinion about the original Kane signing, and since then, we'll just talk about what he does on the ice. And what he does on the ice is a whole lot of different and important things for the Edmonton Oilers. He checks a lot of boxes, David, and it turns out he's going to check them for, frankly, a lower cap hit than I was expecting at just over $5 million, and for a shorter term than he was thought to be looking for, but they managed to compromise at 4 years on term. And of course, the jury's out as to what happens in those 4 years, but I mean, in terms of the contract itself, and I'm looking at guys like Vincent Trocheck and Andrew Kopp, signing for like $500,000 more on longer term contracts, and I'm thinking, would I trade hockey trade Evander Kane for either of those two guys? And I don't think so.
No way.
And he resolves a few problems through this team. I mean, they were with Zach Kassian traded out of town, and Josh Archibald's contract at an end, and Kane looking to be headed for free agency. That was Oilers' three most physical forwards by some measure. And of the three, Kane plays the most, and he rides shotgun with the Stars the most. I mean, Zach Kassian's likelihood of being on the ice with Connor McDavid was significantly lower than Evander Kane's will be. And so that was a gaping hole in the Oilers, the way they were shaping into free agency. And I know some people don't put a lot of stock in physicality, but it's been a big part of the game for as long as I've watched it, and I don't think that's about to change. You've got to have some element of it on your team, right? They don't all have to be Big Bobby Clobber to steal one of your favorites, but you need to have maybe one or two of those sorts.
I stole that from Danny Finkelman. Who my parents listened to on the CBC as I was growing up. Yeah, they had a guy, I think it was Joe Fan, was the guy who talked about hockey, talked about Big Bobby Clobber. Yeah, Bruce, when we go down the list of deals, Like when I was thinking of the Kane contract, I was thinking when people are saying that he might get $7 million a year,
Hmm.
it didn't strike me as crazy talk. Like I thought, like if you have Evander Kane as a free agent right now, without the baggage that Evander Kane has, Bruce, I do believe personally he would have gotten $7 million a year from some team just based on that's what he was getting paid in San Jose.
Hmm.
He was the leading scorer in the playoffs, and not only that,
Goal scorer.
we talked about this, yeah, leading goal scorer. We talked about this during the playoffs, just what I referred to as the swagger coming back to the team with Evander Kane. It was palpable, it was real. His impact on Matthew Tkachuk of the Flames I think he took him right out of the series. He gave Tkachuk way more than Tkachuk gave back to the Oilers. He threw him off, I think, and he was big against the Kings, scored all kinds of big goals in these series. Wasn't particularly good against the Avs, but following up on a pretty remarkable run at the end of the regular season where he just got better and better, then having this breakout playoff campaign. Yeah, you do need team toughness, people standing up for each other, people sacrificing for each other on a team, and Kane did that. I mean, how many times did we see him come to the defense of Connor McDavid or another player in the immediate scrum after something had happened? He was right in there. And I think this is when there's team toughness, that's what it is. It's right in the moment, right on the ice, right in that guy's face, threatening to rip his tonsils out through his mouth, essentially. And Evander Kane does that kind of thing. And I think he genuinely, NHL players are tough guys. They're all tough guys. But I think he
Hmm.
genuinely intimidates other NHL hockey players
Yeah.
with his nastiness and the possibility, as we saw when he turfed Nazem Kadri into the boards, the possibility he's going to injure you in
No, that
in
wasn't
a,
good.
in a melee. That wasn't good. It's part of his game. It was part of Mark
Yes.
Messier's game. That
Yes.
threat and that fear, and to
Mm.
discount it and say it's not. This is actually a big thing in hockey. No one wants to get badly injured. It's at least NHL players certainly do not. And to have that threat hanging over you when you're on the ice with someone who has that kind of X factor like Evander Kane does, I think it's part of what he brings to a team. So I do think he would have gotten $7 million a year. I don't know what the term would have been at his age. Maybe it would have been just been 5 years or 6 years, but I don't think. I think he would have gotten that. So what I think happened was the Ken Holland made a really good move, allowing Kane to go out and search the market because the Oilers were thinking otherwise, that kind of money wasn't going to be there for Kane, I think. Uh, and if it was, they were going to lose him anyway. So the best way to keep him, is Ken Holland said, was to treat him fairly. Let him see what's out there. And that gives them a better chance to know, well, if he's not coming back, we'll know earlier. And then maybe we'll sign David Perron, who signed for 2 years at 4.75 million just now. It gave the Oilers a head start, but it was
Mhm.
also fair. It treated Kane decently. And I think after the treatment, whatever we think of Kane, he perceives he was mistreated in Winnipeg and in San Jose. And to be treated fairly in Edmonton, I think might go some way in him coming back. Anyway, he went out there. And
Mhm.
Bruce, it's my belief, and I could be incorrect about this, but there's the teams he said he went to were the teams that he had approached earlier, who had shown interest in him when the Oilers signed him. And I think those are the teams he had trust in. And they're also the teams that, not every team with Evander Kane's baggage, not every team is gonna go for him. And there's
Mhm.
some places that are simply put, they're more woke than Edmonton, Alberta. There's the whole left coast, the West Coast. They have a different ideology that predominates in those cities. I mean, Edmonton is not exactly the conservative bastion of Alberta. It is a NDP city provincially, but there's some cities where there was going to be a lot. My point is a lot more heat if he signed there, and I think those teams weren't on the list when he was um, coming at 50 cents on the dollar last winter,
Mhm.
and I don't think he wanted to try out those same cities again right now, and I don't think those same cities wanted him. So that limited his market and drove down his price. And this is why I think the Oilers got a $7 million a year player for $5.1 million a year. So great deal for the Oilers.
Exact same cap hit as Nuge, eh? Except for half as long. Nuge got 8 for 41 million. Kane got 4 for 20.5. And he's got no movement clause in there for 2 years and up till almost the trade deadline of the third year, and that's when it can get moved to a no trade with a 16-team list or something. So basically half the league. And that seems like a sensible clause. That's the first one I can remember where the no trade clause changed within the season just before the deadline. But it meant he'd be here for a better part of 3 years, and then if it was time to make a move for whatever reason, for player or for team, they'll have a little more flexibility. And trade deadline of 2025, which is Draisaitl's last year. So by then we should have a pretty good idea where the team is going, I'd like to think.
24, 25, yeah, it's coming up. These things happen fast. Life happens fast.
Do they ever?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Bruce. The Oilers seem to have at least a three-tiered salary structure. So at the very top, you have the three friends, the big friends on the team, and the three superstars. You know, some people won't consider Darnell Nurse a superstar. I actually think he is. Or at least he's a star player. He's in the top 10 NHL defensemen year in, year out now. And the Oilers, as I wrote in a recent post, have gotten huge value to the tune of like 15 to, I can't remember exactly what it was, $16 million in the last of a discount on Nurse in the last few years, I believe. Anyway, he's going to start getting paid. There's McDavid and Draisaitl. So there's these three guys. And I think it's the best strategy. Best strategy for the Oilers. If they want to have Draisaitl and McDavid re-up, they've got to keep these three guys together who are close friends, have been through the wars together, and they have got to win. They're doing the first part when they re-upped with Nurse, giving him that big contract. Now they've got to win. They've got to win. They've got to win the cup. If they don't win the cup, nothing else is going to really matter. I don't think Draisaitl and McDavid will stay in Edmonton. So after that, then you have the second tier, and that's the $5 million men. And this is for good players like Hyman, Kane, and Nugent Hopkins. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they were willing to go with a different term, at least. That certainly Nugent Hopkins and Hyman they could be $6 or $7 million a year players right now, if they had gone with shorter term in other NHL cities. But they want to win as well. So and Kane brought this up in his interview. He was careful in what he said. He something like he didn't think he got the offers of what he deserved. So we don't really know if he turned down money, but he got less money than he thought that he merited. And I happen to agree with that argument. Others are free to disagree. So there's this rung of players, and now Jack Campbell has joined that. You have someone at your door there, Bruce. Jack Campbell has joined this, so he's another $5 million man, and below that is it's going to be pretty tough for anyone to get paid much. We'll talk about the Kulak contract. I think that's going to be, top endish. We have Tyson Barrie at $4.5 million with 2 years left, but there's not room for many more $5 million men. Maybe one more guy. Maybe Evan Bouchard when his contract comes up. But down the road, there could be problems for the Oilers with this kind of contract structure of the three big guys, the $5 million men. And so what happens to Kailer Yamamoto? What happens to Philip Broberry? What happens to Bouchard, Stuart Skinner? If these players turn out, there could be some major suffering and pain from Oilers fans. But, it's also good news if these players turn out. But I'm just throwing that out there because that's looming as the next crisis in Oilertown. But for today, at least, Bruce, they've got to win now. They've got to start, on all cylinders for the Stanley Cup. And this is the strategy to do it. And I think it's the correct strategy. And it's good to see players like Nugent Hopkins, Hyman, and Kane buying into it to the extent that they did.
Yeah, well, Jack Campbell's in that 5 million club as well. And so that's basically three guys at 10 million, or it certainly works out to 30 million, and four guys at 5 million. So you got $50 million baked into seven guys for at least 3 years. Draisaitl's the first one of those guys whose contract expires. Like in the past, we've always said, well, Koskinen contract's going to come due, or next year Keith is going to come due. Well, all those guys now are out of the picture. Grayson
Yeah.
Berry, if you want to include him, his contract's only got 2 years to run. And of course, none of it's, I mean, somebody can be dealt out of all this, but those main guys, they got a lot of no move clauses. And I mean, that's really the core of the team that management wants. They don't want to be trading those guys. They want that to be their guys. And for sure, I mean, they always had the centers three since forever, since honestly before Chiarelli. Chiarelli came with the McDavid draft pick in his jacket pocket, and Draisaitl and Nuge already there, and they're still there. But the weakness remained on the wings, and here in the last year with the additions of Zach Hyman and Evander Kane, the Oilers got two big-time NHL caliber top six natural wingers to play with centers three.
Yeah, and it's going to be tough. Like Warren Fogle, like they're apparently looking to, some insiders like Darren Drager are saying, are they looking to move Warren Fogle? Mm-hmm. He's earning $2.75 million a year. Yeah, and I think that's a real possibility that's going to happen. So
he's an okay player, but you can find okay players for 1.5. Right?
Sure can.
And they're getting to that point now. I think they got about 7.5 left, and they got the 3 restricted free agents. And mind you, if they were to sign the 3 restricted free agents, they pretty much have their team. So they don't need a lot more than that. It's not like they got 4 or 5 other vacancies on the roster. Like I detailed a post this morning with 4 openings, including the number 1, number 3 goalie. They both got signed with an opening on left defense, which was Kulak, and Kane got signed while I was writing the article. And there's basically 1 hole on right wing, and 2 restricted free agents there. So right wing is still a puzzle, but center and left wing positions look solid, and top 6 defense all of a sudden has really taken shape.
What do you think of the Jack Campbell signing, Bruce?
Jack Campbell. He's got pretty good numbers. It's quite a interesting story. Such a convoluted route it took him to get to the NHL after being a number 11 overall first-round draft choice back in 2010. Well, it wasn't until his draft plus 9 season that he finally made it into the NHL, and then as a backup to Jonathan Quick, meaning he probably didn't play a whole lot out there in LA because Quick was a real workhorse. And only after he got traded to Toronto has he ever, staked a claim to be a number 1 goalie, and he's really only done that for the last year and a half. So, but last year in Toronto he was terrific. This year in Toronto he was really good early, and then he had a bit of a slide, but his overall numbers look solid. He's right in at .916 career save percentage, and he seems to be in that range all the time. Goals against average right around 2.5. Be a different system, different number of shots, that kind of thing. But, he's top 10 in the NHL in both goals against average and save percentage for out of 53 goalies that had 2,000 minutes in the NHL the last 2 years. So he's in the top 10 there, and he's 11th in goals saved above expected. So right in line with that. That's pretty close to being a top tier goalie, or certainly within the top half of the league.
Yeah, I don't know the player that well, and goalies are. I mean, I think actually save percentage is a fairly decent way to rate a goalie. Like, it's not the only thing you should look at, and there's probably there's better forms of save percentage when they look at really the expected goals based on the kind of shots. Now that those systems are only as good as the tracking, like if they're actually they're rating the shots correctly. As we know, like you can have 1 5-foot shot which dribbles in on net and is an easy save, and another 5-foot shot into an open net which is going to go in 90% of the time. So depending on how you rate those same 5-foot shots, your expected goals either is going to be really, really excellent, or it's going to be misleading. And I think a lot of the publicly available numbers are somewhat misleading because they can't at this point. It's not possible to rate the shot for velocity and some other things. It's just not, I don't think they're done in the publicly available numbers. So, but when you look at Campbell's career, I noted that he's had about six pretty solid seasons in a row, maybe save for one stretch in LA that got him traded to Toronto. And so he looks like a good bet. I mean, Darcy Kemper signed for similar money, similar term and similar money, which was less than we thought he was going to get in Washington. But we don't know if Kemper was interested in coming here at all. And I have some reason, I don't know who the Oilers would have picked, Kemper or Campbell, in the end if they could just pick on the same amount of money. That's an unknown. We don't know. But it looked like the Oilers were bargaining in good faith with Campbell, probably all good faith because it's all secretive. Of course, they weren't supposed to be bargaining at all, but secretly bargaining in good faith, secretly bargaining in good faith, which the Toronto Maple Leaf fans will be really upset about. But it happens all the time in the NHL with Campbell, and maybe they didn't even want to go in Kemper's direction in the end too much when when the Avs kind of cut him loose because they're already working with this other guy. I don't know how it went. Anyway, it's at the high end of what I would have hoped. Like I would have liked to see less term for Jack Campbell. $5 million for 3 years, $5 million per season for 3 years would have been better. But then he probably wouldn't have signed here. He would have gone elsewhere to some other team. And when we look at what Ville Husso, when you look at Ville Husso's career statistics, he kind of looks like Stuart Skinner might look in a year or two, actually, where Stuart Skinner is going to be. There's not a lot of separate, like he's a few years older than Skinner and he's had one pretty good NHL season, but otherwise their careers look really similar, Husso and Skinner. And Husso got a 3-year deal at $4.75 million cap hit. Alexander Georgiev, who people seem really high on, he got a 3-year deal at $3.4 million cap hit. Cal Peterson, that was a contract signed last September, 3 years at $5 million. Merzlikins, he's a slightly different class of goalie, maybe 5 years at $5.4 million. These are the recent contracts that we see. So it's kind of in line with these recent contracts. It's right there with the Merzlikins contract. There with the Kemper contract. So fingers crossed, Bruce. We'll see what happens with that one. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, he was in Toronto. I mean, 921, 914, just looking at save percentages for 2 years. But also, in terms of wins and losses, 48 wins, 12 losses, 8 other losses. Now, this was Toronto, a high-scoring team. But guess what? Edmonton Oilers are going to be a high-scoring team. So you want a goalie that can keep you around in games. You're going to win a lot of those games. So that's seems to be what his track record is, and his team seems to come out on top a lot. And I mean, all glory to the Toronto Maple Leafs, the greatest team ever that I keep reading about. Boy, there are some sour Leaf fans out there today with that second. After Hyman last year, and now the goaltender coming over here, there's reason to be sour, but
well, they gave up on Cody Ceci. They shouldn't have. Bruce, there must be some sour Flames fans out there too. And I mean, this is the reality of any NHL. You have these fantastic players. They have Johnny Gaudreau and Matt Tkachuk. In Edmonton, we have Draisaitl and McDavid. And like the point of the whole shebang is to win. So these players are going to want to stay in these markets. And Calgary failed to win. I wonder if the Flames had beaten the Oilers if Johnny Gaudreau stays there, or if that was a foregone conclusion all along. It's hard to know. But I wonder if winning might have changed that. Of course, Johnny Gaudreau might have done more to help them win. You could come back with and argue. And I also wonder this, Bruce. In 3 or 4 years, is the team that signed Johnny Gaudreau going to wish that they hadn't signed him? I mean, he had like a 50-point season, I think, 2 years ago, like 70 games and 54 points or something like that. in a down year. So he had easily a fantastic career season, and he's had two pretty good years in a row. But the season before that, he was not so good. So we'll see how that works out for Johnny Gaudreau. Bruce, I want to make one more point about Kane, just and I'll try to be quick here. There's some worry about this arbitration with San Jose. I'm not worried about that. This idea that he's going back to San Jose, I think I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's like 99.9% it wouldn't happen, because San Jose has to go into this hearing arguing we did the right thing in voiding the contract. This guy was a bad actor. We did the right thing. We had every right to do that. Kane's going to go in and well, previously he might have been arguing he wanted that old contract reinstated. That might have been in his initial position. I can't imagine it's his position now. His position now is going to be something like, in good faith, even though these guys shafted me unfairly, I went out and I negotiated a contract with Edmonton. I didn't sit out the season. I mitigated my losses by getting a new contract with a new team. And I played so well that even with this black mark scarlet letter that San Jose's put on me, I have gotten a new contract. I'm saying this is his argument. Whether you believe in the truth of his argument or not is a different question. I now have got a new contract, which pays me $5.1 million a year. And what I want is, no, I don't want to go back to San Jose anymore. I don't want that contract reinstated. I want for them to make good on the money, the difference between the two contracts. Like, I've tried to do it myself with my own powers. I've been unable to do so. And I want San Jose to make me whole because they voided my contract incorrectly. Those would be the two arguments. Nowhere in there do I see an argument where now where Evander Kane ends up back in San Jose. It would be like a double whammy somehow for that to happen. It's not going to happen in the real world of arbitration. And, so that's been raised, but I think it was raised in a different context. And the new context is he's got a new contract and that's going to be recognized and everyone's going to move on. But he might get some money still in a settlement or from an arbitrator.
Yeah, I just heard him interviewed on the Jason Berger show, this being before 3 p.m. on Free Agent Frenzy Day, the Wednesday, and he was first up on the Gregor show, and Jason asked him that question, and he said there's three possible outcomes, right? You win, you lose, or you settle, and if you win, the contract gets reinstated, and Kane, he didn't want to really address it because it's obviously a legal matter, and it's
not going to give his legal strategy to Jason.
Well, if there's legal strategy, there's also legal jeopardy. You just don't talk about stuff when they're under.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so he said, I don't really want to say anything direct, but he says it's not quite so clean cut as you suppose. I took the veiled meaning to be, if he wins, there may be a range of ways that it can be dealt with, where they pay him, plus he keeps the whole new contract that he just got from Edmonton, and maybe he even comes out ahead. So.
Oh, I think so. I think we'll see what happens. I don't know. I just think this whole idea, this worry that some people have that he's going to end up somehow back and San Jose be their property, and no, that's not happening. That's not going to happen. I just don't see it. Maybe I'm not a lawyer, so lawyers out there, you can email me or come after me on Twitter. But no one did. I've put this out there on Twitter. No one's disagreed with me, because I think that it's just, I don't know. I just think it's a misunderstanding, frankly, of the situation. Or maybe the NHL was trying to spin it like this, that he could end up back in San Jose to, I don't know, threaten Kane in some way. But it's not happening. He's going to be an Oiler.
Yeah. I took what he said, even though he couldn't really say outright. I took some reassurance that that's not going to be an issue at the end of the day, and hopefully that's the case. But it's going to be an interesting case. Like, he's got a pretty strong case from where I sit, just from the simple fact that they suspended him for an offense that the NHL never suspended him for, even though it was reportedly his second COVID offense of the season. And when the NHL decided not to follow through with a further suspension and he signed with Edmonton, I thought, boy, I wouldn't like to be in San Jose's shoes in that arbitration hearing, but that's just a very simplified view. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the stuff that we get that, legalese and veiled talk funneled through media is, maybe does tend to oversimplify a very complex situation.
Yeah, and people are spinning things in different ways, like the league is, and maybe San Jose is, and
Everybody
Kane's camp.
does.
They all are. Everybody does. All right, Bruce, let's move on.
Hmm.
Brett Kulak, what did you think of that
Hmm.
deal?
I like it. I like the player. He definitely impressed in the chunk of the season that we saw. Uh, some would say, well, he's a third pairing defenseman. I kind of saw it at the Oilers had one top pairing and then two secondary pairings. So 2A and 2B or 3A and 3B, however you want to cite it. But I thought Barry and Kulak are kind of equivalent uh, opportunity as Keith and Bouchard. And Kulak even did have that one game where he stepped right up when Nurse was suspended into the top pairing and he handled it okay. I think he's got his limitations, but he's also really got his strengths. He's a really mobile skater. He's very good at breaking up rushes before they ever even get into the zone, like making stops at the defensive blue line. Uh, and he's okay with the puck and that speed, as Bill James famously said, speed is the one attribute that you use on both offense and defense, and that applies equally in hockey as it does in baseball. Uh, so I like the signing, and then the more I look around and see guys like Eric Goodbranson signed for $4 million, and thinking the Oilers got Letty 4 times 2.75. I mean, it's a nice raise for him, about 50%. And from the Oilers' perspective, because they got a 50% retained when he came, it's almost a $2 million raise to keep the same player on their salary cap. Uh, Added to $3 million raise for Evander Kane. But guess what? This is where Duncan Keith's subtraction the uh, from the salary cap has made an impact and given Ken Holland a bit more flexibility to keep the rest of his team.
Ben Sherratt,
Oh,
um,
there you go.
31 years old, Bruce. Not that fast to start with, as I recall. And he
Yep.
got a 4-year deal at 4.7 million. I mean, that's essentially the Evander Kane deal. Um, that's that's a lot of money from Detroit. You mentioned Goodbranson, 4 years at $4 million.
Mm-hmm.
There's who else do we have here? Ilya Lubashishkin,
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Labushkin?
Labushkin.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. I'm not meaning to
Sorry. I think
mispronounce
it's
it. 2 years at
Leah.
2.7, 2 years at 2.7 million. I can't comment on that player, but I
I'd
can
rather
on
have Kulak at the same price than Labushkin, I can tell you that.
Labushkin. So Bruce, I just think I'm okay with this. I thought Kulak was someone who came and very much like Duncan Keith, got better the longer he was here. The more he played with the Oilers, the more I liked him. Um, and he and Tyson Barrie in the playoffs were fantastic. They were like everything you'd want from the, third/second pairing defense, maybe a little bit more violent play if you're into that kind of thing. But they moved the puck well. Tyson Barrie played the best hockey of his career, the best two-way hockey of his career. Maybe it helped having someone so fast as Kulak to work with. They were really strong. They were really good, and I look forward to seeing them together. If Kulak doesn't, in fact, move up the lineup to play with Evan Bouchard in the second pairing through the playoffs, with Nurse struggling so badly, people will remember I was lobbying strongly for Kulak to play in the top pairing with Cody Ceci, mainly because Nurse's injuries limited him so much. I think it probably in the end would have been the right decision, although we did see him get some shifts against Nathan MacKinnon and get eaten alive. But he's not the only defenseman to get eaten alive by Nathan MacKinnon. So there is this possibility, I think, that Kulak is going to be able to step into the top four and perform there. Ken Holland in his press conference mentioned something that I've been talking about quite a bit. I talked about it that we've been talking about quite a bit over the years. Defensemen hit this age of 25, and we saw this with Steve Staios. We see it more recently with Cody Ceci, this age 25, 26, 27. And as Ken Holland put it, they pop. They suddenly make the right reads defensively. They're not so much out of they're in position, they're confident, they're moving the puck. They're their fundamental defensive play is sound. And so there's this sweet spot, I think, like 26 to 32 for NHL defensemen. And Kulak's just at the start of that. And he's going to be in that sweet spot for this contract. And I see him kind of fulfilling the role, if not in the top four, Bruce, kind of what Chris Russell did as the 4-5, just an excellent 4-5 guy who can step into the top four. So if Philip Broberry develops, for instance, and they put him with Bouchard eventually, you'll have Kulak then in the 4-5 slot to step in if someone gets injured. And I think he'll do well there. And he's at a cheaper price than Chris Russell was $4 million a year in that role, whereas Kulak is going to be $2.75 million a year. So this is, if he can fulfill that role and fulfill it well, and I think he can, this is a very good contract for the Edmonton Oilers and for Ken Holland as well.
Yeah, the funny thing is that Kulak signing was announced, and it kind of came out of left field during my weekly spot on TSN 1260 with on the Low Tide and Jameson show, Wednesday mornings, 11 o'clock, new time. And that was when I was on this morning when the Kulak deal came down. And of course, we talked about it, and I thought I saw him as a 4-5 defenseman. The Oilers had 4-5 defensemen dating back to Nick Schultz, who came in partway through a 4-year contract in the $3.5 million range. And then they had Andrew Ferentz that they signed, 4-year deal. Mark Fane that they signed, 4-year deal. Chris Russell that they signed, 4-year deal. And all of them kind of played the same role within the team, whether they were good enough or not. I mean, how good was the team? But I think I'd take Brett Kulak ahead of any of those other guys. And guess what? His 4-year deal is below the $3 million mark in a time when the overall cap is higher. So his percent of the cap is relatively low. And I'm pretty comfortable, I think, with him as a 4-5, where he's filling in on the second pair and can hold his own, or he could be a really strong leader of the third pair. And that's a good player to have.
I wonder, there had been talk, and I had been mentioning this, that Tyson Barrie has more value in another NHL city than he does in Edmonton. That might have changed a little bit with Duncan Keith leaving, because suddenly you need veteran defensemen in the NHL, yes. I think. So that equation may have changed enough that Tyson Barrie won't be moved. It's funny, I'm just looking at Twitter to see if we're missing anything, and there's a lot of talk right now about the Nikita Zadorov contract. And if Kane hadn't signed here, I had this feeling that the Oilers would try to get Zadorov, who I actually kind of liked. I didn't watch him that closely. Wasn't breaking down the video on Nikita Zadorov, but he was kind of a scary and seemed like a pretty good player for the Flames. And I wondered if the Oilers might not have been going for Zadorov. And maybe, who knows, maybe they are going to still bring in another left defenseman. And maybe there's still a trade out there with Tyson Barrie. I don't know. But I think that the equation with Barrie has changed with Keith retiring, and that the Oilers will hang on to him this year, most probably.
Well, I mean, they've lost Keith, they've lost Chris Russell.
Yeah.
Tyson Barrie was their third most experienced defenseman. All of a sudden, he's their most experienced defenseman. You're just going to move him along? I mean, we're going to want to at least think long and hard about it. I understand the rationale, the salary cap, that he makes good coin. He's a power play specialist. Some people think Evan Bouchard could be just as good in the power play. Last year's stats don't suggest that, but then again, Bouchard did not play on the first power play as often as Barrie. But Barrie's very good on the power play, and better than he gets credited, I think. And you want to call him a third pairing defenseman? Well, that third pairing was excellent. I mean, Kulak in his time in Edmonton, regular season and playoffs, 34 games, 13 points plus 13. So they were outscoring, and he was getting points, and Barrie was getting points, and they were skating and moving the puck. Thought that was what people wanted.
Apparently, Columbus has offered Johnny Gaudreau 7 years, $12 million a year.
Oh, wow, $12 million.
Well, you got to spend your money somehow. They don't have a star there, so.
David's still the only player there, and he's about to go into his 5th year under the 12.5.
Who's that?
Connor McDavid. It's the only one
Oh,
that's ever got
yeah,
12
okay.
million.
Yeah, in the whole NHL. So anyway, we'll see what happens there. Bruce, let's talk about a trade that's been rumored. Connor Brown from the Ottawa Senators. And initially, people were thinking, oh, they might trade Fogle for him, or they might trade Jesse Puljujärvi for him. But it turns out that Ottawa wants draft picks
Mm-hmm.
for Connor Brown. Connor Brown, I'll just quickly give the bio. He played for 2 years with Connor McDavid when Connor McDavid was 15 and 16 in the OHL, just a really young kid. Connor Brown's 3 years older, and he
Right.
was the star on that team. He actually led the
Yes.
OHL in scoring one year. And he went to the Toronto Maple Leafs and then to the Senators, where he's been a decent player, a good player, decent two-way player. His scoring is kind of last year at least, kind of if you look at his points per 60 to even strength, it looks like kind of like a low level third line player. I think he scores a little bit less than Yamamoto and Derek Ryan at even strength on a rate basis, and a little bit more than Cassian did and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins did. It's always shocking to see Ryan Nugent-Hopkins even strength scoring, which has been so weak in recent years. So he's not a great even strength scorer, but he's good on the PK, as you have pointed out. What do you think of him as a possible acquisition for the Oilers?
Oh, well, I think he's a nice fit. I mean, he's a real good player. I've liked this player for a long time, Connor Brown. I even liked him when he was in Toronto. And I don't say that about every Maple Leaf, but he was on that very fine rookie group in Toronto. I'm just bringing it up now in 2015, 16. Rookies in Toronto: William Nylander, Zach Hyman, Connor Brown, uh, Kasperi Kapanen, and then, oh wait a minute, it was the next year that Matthews came in, and they just had this just incredible group of rookies: Matthews, Nylander, Marner, Brown, Zaitsev, Hyman, Kapanen, all rookies on the same team. So he kind of got bottom six out of that just because of who he was with. You know, Marner and Nylander were always going to be in the scoring lines ahead of Connor Brown. And he became a very well-rounded player, David, and a very hard-working penalty killer. I looked it up this morning. In the 3 years he's been in Ottawa, he's had the most minutes on the PK of any forward in the league, and second behind only noted penalty kill specialist Jay Beagle in average ice time killing penalties per game over a 3 year span. And so, you know, that's an area the Oilers, I mean, any team's always on the lookout for an experienced, accomplished penalty killer, and so he'd be a big fit there. Uh, he was last year in Ottawa in the Canadian division. He was scoring shorties, and he was a big player for Ottawa. They didn't have that great of a team, but he was a key player, and he was great in the World Championships last year when Canada won the surprise gold medal. He was on a line with Adam Henrique and Andrew Mangiapane, and they just lit it up. So a very good passer, half decent finisher. You know, like he's got a lot of game. He's got 1 year left at 3.6 million, and then he'll be unrestricted. And I guess the question is, if Ottawa is looking to peddle him and trying to get draft picks, why on earth are they talking to the Edmonton Oilers, who seem to have traded off all of their second, third, and fourth round draft picks forever?
Maybe Oilers are trying to hope, like they're still trying apparently to move Fogle and Puljujärvi, Bruce. Maybe they're hoping now to get draft picks, future draft picks for those two
Mm-hmm.
players. I don't know. The Fogle contract, I think, could be hard to move. Based, I think he's a decent player, but I'm not sure if NHL teams that are cash strapped right now are going to be looking at $2.75 million a year for Fogle for 2 more years and thinking, well, we want a piece of that. I have my doubts. I do think still that there's a market for Jesse Puljujärvi, that there's a lot of teams heavily invested into analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Highly aware of them, and Brad Holland spelled out, the analytics argument in favor of Jesse Puljujärvi the other day, the Oilers' new assistant GM. So
Sure was good to hear an Oilers executive type talking that in those terms. I have to say, I was very encouraged. I heard Brad Holland interviewed by Bob Stauffer the other day, and I did a lot of this, nodding my head while I was listening to him talk.
he's certainly
So,
aware of these numbers, and I have a sense he knows what they mean and what they don't mean.
hmm
And we just don't know. There's a number of things we don't know with Puljujärvi. Again, we don't
right,
even have, we don't know if what his contract ask is, and
right.
that could be driving the lack of demand in a trade, and it could be lack of interest from the Oilers. And we don't know, like, there's this, again, how does he fit in with McDavid and Draisaitl? Is it true that they don't want him on their line, as we've heard, like this has been out there, and is that in fact a fact, or is it just scuttlebutt? So there's these unknowables, or
hmm
we're not going to find out about
hmm
these things, but I'm hopeful that everyone has a second look at this. You're bringing back Kane. You got, they're going to sign Yamamoto. How about just
Yes,
1 year deal on Puljujärvi, see how it goes? Like,
yes,
one more year,
yes,
man. Just see
please.
see how this goes. And
Raise your value, and then
yeah, trade for
we'll
Connor Brown
talk or
as well.
we'll move you when your value is up as opposed to right now when it isn't up.
Yeah, there's a player. He's a good hockey player, Bruce, I think. So I hope that's what might
Brad
happen.
Holland thinks so too.
I don't have a strong feeling on Connor Brown. Again, with players coming in into Edmonton where I haven't done, through bitter experience where I've rated players about, players that I've seen a few times, a handful of times, and been dead wrong about because I didn't see them enough and I didn't put in the work. So I don't do that anymore. So I'm not going to say what except in general terms, like I can see that, where he, as a point scorer, we can say he's a third line guy,
hmm
generally speaking, Connor Brown, at least he was last year. Other than that, I can't give a credible view because I haven't done the video review necessary to properly rate this player, and I don't have someone else who's done that kind of work who can provide me with their stat sheet. And it was interesting when Brad Holland talked about stats. He talked about a new role for video. This is the essence of the new statistical revolution in the NHL is looking at video, breaking down
hmm
that video in all kinds of different ways that haven't been done in the past. That's what's going on behind the scenes by these NHL teams. And it's information which no one has access to unless you're buying one of the services of an NHL team, or like probably the Toronto Maple Leafs, doing it on your own, doing all that hard work on your own to really get a sense of players. So Holland, if they're after Connor Brown, I suspect they're seeing that they're
He's a
doing
good
that
player.
video work. And Brad Holland did mention that they subscribe to some service or another. I'm not sure if it's which one it is. Is it Sportlogique that the Oilers, Sport Logic or Sportlogique that
Oh,
the
more than one service. I
Oilers
mean,
have? Yeah,
Instat.
they probably have a.
He said Holland said that they can basically watch any professional game anywhere in the
That's in.
world within 2 hours of it being over. So,
We
you know,
we
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 did
were
some of
on
that with
that.
Instat, and they had a lot of the world. I didn't have all of it, but there's more than one service out there, and I would think a pro hockey team would probably have their pick.
Yeah, so there's both the service for watching the games and there's the service for people who watch the game and break down those numbers into different individual metrics that the players are involved in. Like Staffleets has been doing that
hmm
for
Yes.
almost a decade now, and other companies do that work as well. All right, so Connor Brown, like if they're going after him, I've got after what I've seen with some of the players who have come into Edmonton, like Cody Ceci, I'm open to seeing what they can come up with in this player, and I'm heartened that you, in your viewings of him, think that he's a good player.
I have him in my keeper league, David, and not only
Uh-huh.
did I draft him, I protected him. So I obviously have high opinion of Connor Brown. I mean, he's right in the heart of his career, 28 years old, 444 games, and you know he's just a responsible two-way forward, and so I mean he'd be a good fit on a lot of teams. I'm not saying I like him over Puljujärvi. Trade yes for him, but uh, if they wind up with holes on right wing and Connor Brown is one of the solutions, I'm okay with that part of it at least.
Johnny, they're officially out on Johnny Gaudreau. It seems like two teams are still on Johnny Gaudreau. I mean, by the time people listen to this podcast, it'll all be done with. I just wonder if the second team won't get Nazem Kadri. Like one team will get Gaudreau and the other team will get Kadri. And I'm surprised. I thought Calgary might be in on Kadri, and maybe they
Me
are.
too.
Yeah, like Calgary has done nada, Bruce. It's just
I
I thought
was
they might get Mason Marchment or like someone
I
who
thought they'd
would
get
cause me
Kane.
consternation.
I thought they'd get
Patrick Kane,
Kane.
maybe
When
they
I heard
will.
Goodrow was going, I thought, geez, Kane's out there allowed to talk to other teams. Calgary's going to tell him, yeah, we want you. Remember, you beating on us in the playoffs. But then when Kane came back and already signed last night, that really was a surprise. But I guess either Calgary wasn't interested or he wasn't interested in Calgary. Maybe that was the issue. But they're they're in trouble at the moment. I mean, they've lost Goodrow and there's no obvious replacement. If I was them, I'd be hard on Kadri at this point.
If they've got to figure it out with Matthew Tkachuk, right, too, because
Yep.
is he a UFA after next season?
After next season.
Or yeah. So they can't have what happened to Gaudreau. Like I could see them going to win the Stanley Cup with Gaudreau and Tkachuk and
Mhm.
the Lindholm and the players that they had.
Mhm.
Minus Gaudreau, that changes things. Like, and you can't then also say, well, we're just going to lose Matthew Tkachuk for nothing.
Oh, no,
So
no.
they are in a very different. And you know what? It's a tough spot. Like a younger version of me might have gloated about the Flames being in such a tough spot. But Bruce, man, we have been here in Edmonton so many times
Yeah.
with this kind of pain and agony, like, from Gretzky to Pronger. We've seen this situation play out. It hurts. It hurts a lot. And it's a big blow to a franchise. It's hard for them to come back from. But I do note the New York Islanders lost John Tavares a few years ago
Mhm.
and came back and had a great season.
Two great seasons.
Two great seasons. So, and Toronto's probably, I'm guessing, maybe thinking, maybe that contract with Tavares wasn't the best thing we might have done with all that money. So who knows how these things will play out? But right now, it hurts to be a Flames fan.
Well, Kachuk holds the hammer to the extent that he can hold out for arbitration, get a 1 year deal, and leave at the end of it, right? Which is sort of the Jeff Petrie scenario that we might remember in Edmonton, where Petrie held that hammer and eventually did get moved out of town. Uh, my guess is that Matthew Kachuk will sign an 8 year extension in Calgary at some point, and he'll be the sort of face of the team if he isn't already going forward. And they'll pay him, but they're going to be able to pay him because they've got all of a sudden a little more cap space than they anticipated. And I
Does he
won't
want
laugh
to go
at
to
Calgary.
Ottawa?
I'd rather beat Calgary in the Battle of Alberta, and it's hard to have a Battle of Alberta in the playoffs when the Flames finish in last place in the regular season, right? So,
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. Like my bet is he doesn't sign in Calgary, and either
that's it.
he either ends up in Ottawa with his brother if that's his priority, or he goes to the States.
Hmm.
There was I can't remember, like we saw Andrew Kopp go back to his hometown in Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we do see these kinds of things with players when they have freedom, to pick
Sometimes.
the exact place that they want. And I could see Ottawa. Ottawa certainly got the chips to trade for Matthew Tkachuk, and that could happen. Or so I'm not as positive as you about him ending up with the Flames, especially after what's happened with Gaudreau leaving. So the Oilers signed a couple other guys. Just we can quickly
Yep.
Center Greg Mckay,
Mm-hmm.
kind of um, we can leave it at that.
Guy who's
I
played
don't know enough.
250 NHL games for 7 different teams, every
Really?
last one of them in the Eastern Conference. So I've seen very little of Greg McCaig in his career. A little bit more I can say about Calvin Pickard, who they picked up, and I think is a really good sort of Main Street signing of a number 3 organizational goalie, which the Oilers did need. Uh, they've got you need 2 guys at the NHL level, but you got to have a guy down in the AHL that you're comfortable calling up to play in an emergency for a week or a month. To at least fill in as a backup at the NHL level. And I would not have been comfortable with that if Ryan Fanti and Olivier Rodrigue were the only guys down there in the minor leagues. Well, in Pickard, they got a guy with 116, I think it is, NHL games. He's played at least one game in the bigs for 8 years in a row. I mean, he's not likely to be overwhelmed by getting exposed to big league shooters. He's got a career save percentage of .903, which is not good but decent. Like, he's not terrible. And I've seen him watched him have and win good games where he played strongly. He's just right for that task because he's not so good that you can't put him on waivers because someone's going to grab him the way Oilers lost Anton Forsberg. They're going to put him on waivers and he's going to clear and he'll be down there in Bakersfield until such time as something happens that they need him up here for a bit, and he'll come up and he'll be okay.
Yeah, he's one of those goalies that has always been kind of like talked about as someone the Oilers might get, especially earlier in his career, like he was a possible starter, and then later on as a possible backup, and now he's here. If someone had told me that Greg Mckay was an NHL player before today, I wouldn't have known that. So that's how much I know him.
I was shocked to see he was over 200 games. I'd heard the name. I just, whoa, 200.
Yeah. Nazem Kadri, someone's saying here he might go back to Colorado. I wouldn't be surprised. Like, if they can figure out a way to make that happen still. Would not be surprised. Just if they can figure out a way to make the money close, Kadri might think, man, I want to get in there and win some Stanley Cups in Colorado.
They kept Nichushkin and Lakin, the 2 great checking left wingers, scoring and checking left wingers that dominated for them, frankly, in the playoffs. And they kept Josh Manson. They signed him to a 4-year extension, $4.5 million.
Yeah.
And I mean, they saved a little bit on the goaltending budget with the way they moved those guys around, but I'm not sure that how they could possibly have enough to pay Kadri, because that's going to be a big ticket.
Well, could they not trade that $5 million a year defenseman?
Samuel Girard? Yeah, maybe that would do it. That would do it.
Yeah, they could find the money, at least in the short term, that way. If they valued Kadri over Girard, and we don't know that they do. Maybe they won the Cup without both of those players, essentially, to some extent. I mean, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens, Bruce. Bruce, we come to the end. Is there any other final thoughts or anything you'd like to add?
Well, yeah, one thought. I was just recalling Evander Kane's conversation with Jason Gregor, and Gregor asked him outright about his showdown with Tkachuk during the Flames series, and Kane said something along the lines of, "It doesn't matter what you say to me on the ice. I've heard it before. It doesn't bother me. But when I say stuff back to you, you might not have heard that before." And maybe I got to him, or words to that effect. You'd have to listen to the archive to get the exact wording of that. But I think he thinks he got under Matthew Tkachuk's skin a little bit. And based on what we saw of the series, it's hard to disagree with that.
I wonder what he said. It's probably best that nobody knows what he said.
What he's heard, yeah. Or what he said, exactly. Yeah, he would have heard a lot, I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
And he gives it as good as I mean, one of the things that stands out about that player is attitude and swagger. And you may not like those things in an individual person, but I think as a hockey team, you kind of got to have it somewhere. And most successful teams have some element of that. And and the other thing Holland said, more seriously, he said he interviewed all the players in the exit interviews. He said every last one of them said they wanted Evander Kane back as a teammate.
Wow.
So
yeah.
So
That's pretty.
it's a complex situation. You know, I've seen lots of pictures of him doing real good stuff with kids below the stands before games and stuff. And then you got this other stuff, and you know, I don't want to underplay that. It's important, but it's not something that's easily described in a sentence or a paragraph. You kind of need a book.
Alrighty, Bruce, let's leave it there.
Hmm.
Always great to talk to you. Thanks for talking.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.